April 17, 1975. Victorious soldiers swarm the Cambodian capital of Phnom Penh. The civil war is over, but the crowds cheering for them don't chant the name of a general or a politician. They celebrate a word, an entity they have been told is their liberator – Angkar, the organization. When citizens asked the soldiers who their leader was, they would receive the same chilling, cryptic reply: Angkar is the leader. This wasn't a political revolution, it was the birth of a new god. A god with no face, no voice, and no mercy. And behind this god, hiding in the shadows, was its chief architect, a man named Soloth Sar, better known to the world as Pol Pot. But this is not the story of a typical dictator seeking fame and glory. It's the story of a man who did the opposite. He worked tirelessly to make himself invisible, to erase his own identity, all in service of the terrifying entity he was building. This leads us to a dark and profound question. Why would one of history's most powerful tyrants build a god-king only to give all the power away to it? The answer reveals a truth far more disturbing than a simple lust for control. The architect of the void. To understand the god called Angkar, you must first understand the man who dreamed it into existence. Long before he was Pol Pot, he was Soloth Sar, a quiet, unassuming student from a comfortable family. He was described by many as unremarkable, even gentle. Sent to Paris on a scholarship in the 1940s, he found himself not in the lecture halls of engineering, but in the smoke-filled cafes of radical ideology. He didn't just read about revolution, he inhaled it. He saw a world poisoned by individualism, by money, by family ties, by religion. He became obsessed with an idea of absolute purity, a society reset to zero, free from the corruption of history. This wasn't just a political belief, it was a fanatical spiritual quest. When he returned to Cambodia and rose through the ranks of the nascent Communist Party, the Khmer Rouge, he brought this terrifying idealism with him. But he made a bizarre strategic choice. Unlike other leaders who built massive cults of personality, think of Mao's Little Red Book or Stalin's omnipresent portraits, Pol Pot cultivated anonymity. He became known only as Brother Number One. His photograph was not circulated, his name was not to be spoken. He was the high priest, not the deity. The deity was Angkar. Angkar was the organization. It was the party, the state, and the collective will of the people all rolled into one abstract concept. And when his Khmer Rouge army finally seized control of the country, the world witnessed the first horrifying revelation of what this truly meant. On day one, Angkar's will was made manifest. The Khmer Rouge declared they were hitting the reset button on reality itself. They called it Year Zero. And the first commandment from this new god was to abandon the cities. Within hours, millions of people in Phnom Penh were forced from their homes at gunpoint. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, children, the elderly all marched out into the countryside. They were told that Angkar had decided the cities were corrupt and that to be purified, they must become agrarian peasants. There was no debate, no appeal. You did not question Angkar. The soldiers gave them a chilling proverb: Angkar has as many eyes as a pineapple. It was everywhere, and it saw everything. Pol Pot wasn't asking for political loyalty, he was demanding absolute faith. He had successfully convinced his followers, and now his nation, that their lives were governed not by a man, but by an infallible, omniscient, divine will. He had built his God. But a new God requires more than just followers. It requires sacrifice. And Angkar, this faceless god of purity, demanded the greatest sacrifice of all. It didn't just want your labor or your loyalty. It wanted you to sacrifice everything that made you human. To ensure Angkar was the only god, Every rival had to be systematically destroyed. And the most powerful rivals were not armies or political factions. They were the ideas and institutions that give human life meaning. First came religion. Over 90% of Cambodia's Buddhist temples were destroyed. Monks were disrobed and forced into labor camps. Ancient statues were smashed. This was not just anti-religious policy, it was deicide. Angkar would have no other gods before it. Next came family, the core of Cambodian society. Angkar declared that emotional attachments were a form of corruption. Children were separated from their parents and indoctrinated in collective nurseries. They were taught that their only true parent was Angkar. They were even encouraged to spy on their own mothers and fathers, reporting any whispers of dissent, any sign of lingering affection for the old world. The family unit was a competing religion, and it too had to be erased. Then knowledge itself became an enemy. Libraries were burned, schools were closed. Wearing glasses was seen as a sign of being a corrupt intellectual and could be a death sentence. Money was abolished. Private property was forbidden. Love was forbidden. Marriages were arranged by the state to people you had never met, all in service of Angkar. Every pillar of individual identity was pulverized, leaving a vacuum. And into that vacuum crept the paranoia and judgment of Angkar. To survive, you had to prove your absolute devotion. And there was only one place to do that: the Inquisition Chamber, the most infamous of which was a former high school in Phnom Penh, codenamed S21. S21, also known as Tuol Sleng, was not just a prison. It was a place of ritual purification. The men, women, and children sent there were not just prisoners, they were heretics. Their crime was not against the state, but against the purity of Angkar's ideology. And their punishment wasn't simply death, it was confession. Before they were killed, prisoners were tortured for months until they produced elaborate fictional confessions, sometimes hundreds of pages long. They would confess to being spies for foreign powers, to sabotaging the revolution, to harboring impure thoughts. They would name their friends, their wives, their children as co-conspirators. This was the ultimate expression of Angkar's power. The goal wasn't to find the truth, the goal was to prove Angkar's divine omniscience. By confessing to crimes they never committed, the prisoners were validating that Angkar was right all along. It knew there were traitors hiding everywhere. The confession was the final act of submission. It was a religious ritual where the heretic admits the perfection of the god before being sacrificed to it. Angkar didn't just take your life, it took ownership of your very soul. Pol Pot, the high priest, had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. His god was absolute. It had erased history, family, and faith. It held the power of life and death, and it could force anyone to confess to anything. But the architect of this perfect system overlooked one fatal flaw in his creation. What happens when a paranoid god, built on the idea of hidden enemies, runs out of outsiders to blame? It begins to look inward. By 1977, the utopia was a nightmare. The Cambodian economy had collapsed. Starvation and disease were rampant. But in the theology of Angkar, the system could not fail. Angkar was perfect, absolute, and pure. Therefore, any failure had to be the result of a conspiracy. The enemy was not the flawed ideology, but traitors hiding within the party itself. Pol Pot, acting as the divine hand of Angkar, unleashed a new wave of terror, this time directed at his own ranks. His most loyal generals, his most fervent ministers, men who had fought by his side for decades, were arrested. They were sent to S21, the same Inquisition chamber they had helped create. They were subjected to the same tortures, forced to write the same impossible confessions, and then executed. This wasn't just political maneuvering. It was the terrifying, logical conclusion of the religion he had built. The god of paranoia demanded an endless supply of heretics. The revolution began to devour itself. Pol Pot, trapped in his own creation, could not stop it. To doubt Angkar's paranoia would be to doubt Angkar itself, the one thing he could not do.
The endless purges crippled the Khmer Rouge from within. The chain of command was shattered. The military was in chaos. When neighboring Vietnam invaded in late 1978, the supposedly invincible regime, guided by the all-powerful Angkar, crumbled in a matter of weeks. Pol Pot and the remnants of his followers fled back into the jungle from which they had come. But the god he created had one last victim to claim, its own creator. In the following years, his own disillusioned followers, tired of the paranoia and bloodshed, turned on him. The high priest was overthrown by his own acolytes. The man who commanded the deaths of nearly 2 million people died in 1998, under house arrest, a frail and forgotten old man. He wasn't killed by an enemy army or brought to international justice. He was simply rendered irrelevant. Angkar, the abstract god of pure ideology, had no more use for its profit. It had consumed his nation, his followers, his revolution, and finally it consumed him, leaving nothing but a legacy of horror and a country of ghosts.
The story of Pol Pot is a chilling reminder of a danger that goes far beyond the ambition of a single man. His ultimate tyranny wasn't a quest for personal glory. It was a quest to build a perfect system, an infallible ideology, and to make all of humanity serve it. He wasn't building a dictatorship. He was building a religion. The god of this religion was Angkar, a faceless entity of pure ideology. And in his role as its high priest, he fed it his country. He sacrificed family, love, knowledge, and history to make it all-powerful. In the end, the system he designed to be perfect became a self-devouring machine, and its final, logical act was to consume its own creator. Pol Pot didn't just die. He was erased by the very void he had engineered. He proves that the most dangerous tyrant isn't always the one who puts his face on every building, but the one who convinces us to bow before a faceless idea, no matter the human cost. And that leaves us with one final, haunting question to consider. In our own modern search for perfect systems, for flawless ideologies that promise a better world, at what point does a system stop serving people and start demanding that people serve it?